Week 24, Dissenters in America and the Age of Reason. We're continuing to follow developments on both sides of the Atlantic this week. England had a glorious revolution in 1688, and France tried to take over much of Europe. The Age of Reason was in full swing, with philosophers trying to apply the new scientific methods to every kind of subject, including human beings. Older students will learn about the Great Northern War that ruined Sweden, weakened Poland, and thrust a young Russian known as Peter the Great into the high-stakes game of power politics in Europe. We'll see more of him next week. In America, we'll focus on religious issues, the establishment of Pennsylvania and Delaware, some significant religious views that shaped American culture through the colonial era. Specifically, we'll read about the life of Anne Hutchinson, the beliefs of the Quakers who first settled and governed Pennsylvania, and the Salem witch trials. These 17th century events helped shape America's unique religious pluralism. England had its own religious issues. The people there had welcomed Charles II back to the throne after the years of Puritan rule, but he was getting older and had no legitimate son who could inherit the throne. The debate over who should succeed him led to England's first political parties, the Whigs and the Tories. The Whigs tried to pass a bill in Parliament that would keep Charles's Catholic brother James from succeeding him. The Tories objected to any such legislation. Charles responded to this political agitation by dissolving Parliament. He ruled for his last 4 years as an absolute monarch. When he died, his brother succeeded him as James II, an openly Catholic king who openly insisted on a divine right to absolute rule. If it hadn't been for the bitter experience of their recent Civil War, and the more distant memory of the Wars of the Roses before that, English Protestants might have risen up in revolt. But James was aging and, like Charles, had no legitimate son to take the throne. He had 2 grown daughters from his first marriage. They were both Protestants and were next in line for the throne. Moderate Anglicans gritted their teeth and waited for their Catholic king to die. Their hopes were dashed when James's second wife, a young Catholic princess from Italy, became pregnant. A son, James Francis Edward, was born in June 1688. 20 days later, a group of nobles invited William, Prince of Orange, to invade England. William was the son-in-law of James II. He had married his Protestant daughter Mary. When William's army landed in November, many Protestants joined him. Even Princess Anne, James's other Protestant daughter, joined the rebellion. King James had a bigger army, but less nerve. He sent his wife and infant son to France, threw the Great Seal of the realm into the River Thames, and ran away. William captured him, but allowed him to escape to France, where King Louis XIV took him in as a refugee. William called a parliament together which decided that James's choice to flee constituted an abdication of government. Parliament determined that the throne was vacant. They wanted to proclaim Mary, James's oldest daughter, queen, but William and Mary insisted they should rule jointly. This transfer of power in 1688 became known as the Glorious Revolution because Parliament replaced the king without shedding any English blood. Things weren't quite as peaceful in Scotland and Ireland, where there were riots, and William had to subdue them by force. A Scottish philosopher, John Locke, wrote 2 treatises to justify the Glorious Revolution. His 17th century theories had a big influence on the American Revolution. Locke's theory of government started with a hypothetical state of nature, a term previously popularized by Thomas Hobbes, another British political philosopher. Hobbes had argued in favor of absolute monarchy because he viewed the state of nature as a place where life was poor, nasty, brutish, and short, a war of all against all. Locke viewed the state of nature very differently. Locke argued that people freely chose to enter into society in order to protect the property they acquired through their own labor. This led Locke to a more limited view of government. He argued that citizens had a right to rebel against any king who turned tyrant, or who, through a long train of abuses and usurpations, proved his intention to turn tyrant. We'll hear those words again when Thomas Jefferson drafts the Declaration of Independence in 1776. While Locke was arguing for the right to change a king, Louis XIV was still very much the absolute monarch of France. France wasn't big enough for Louis anymore. He wanted to join the Spanish Empire to his French territory. It all began when Charles II, King of Spain, died without an heir in 1700. Due to generations of royal marriages between France and Spain, Charles's will gave the crown to a French prince, Philip of Anjou, the grandson of Louis XIV. Louis quickly pronounced his grandson King of Spain. With France and Spain all in the same family, The Spanish ambassador said the Pyrenees Mountains no longer separated the two kingdoms. The rest of Europe sat up and took notice. It looked like France could annex Spain and all its dominions at one stroke. William III had fought Louis's aggressive foreign policy for years as the head of the Dutch Republic. He now led England, Holland, Prussia, Austria, and most of the rest of the Holy Roman Empire to form a Grand Alliance to keep Spain from merging with France. The members of the Grand Alliance tried to put Archduke Charles of Austria on the throne of Spain instead of Philip of Anjou. They declared war on France and Spain in 1702. Although William died that same year, his sister-in-law, Queen Anne, succeeded him to the throne and kept England in the fight for the next 12 years. Europeans call this the War of Spanish Succession, but it reached all the way to America, where the colonists knew it as Queen Anne's War. The War of Spanish Succession finally ended with the Treaty of Utrecht, which recognized Philip as King of Spain under the condition that Spain and France should never be united. France finally had to recognize Queen Anne's right to the British crown after years of supporting insurrections in support of James II and his son, that little baby who had cost him his crown. Ironically, Queen Anne died the next year in 1714. Louis XIV, the grand old man of Europe, died the year after. He was just 4 days shy of turning 77, and he had sat on the throne of France since he was 4 years old. His 5-year-old great-grandson reigned in his place as Louis XV. Louis's death marked the end of an age in Europe. Let's leave Europe behind for now and turn our attention to America. We're focusing on Pennsylvania this week, a haven for religious dissidents. That gives us an opportunity to look at a number of 17th century religious events that helped shape the American colonies. We'll study the trial of Anne Hutchinson, the plight of the Quakers, and the Salem witchcraft trials this week. Let's start with the troubling case of Anne Hutchinson. Every account of her is different. This week's dialectic and rhetoric resources provide 2 good examples of that. She was undoubtedly a brilliant and spiritual woman who fell afoul of the Puritan authorities in Massachusetts. In 1637, she was excommunicated, convicted of blasphemy, and banished from Massachusetts. She helped found Rhode Island as a haven for religious dissidents. It's far from clear, to me at least, whether Anne Hutchinson was in the right or in the wrong. Depending on who you read, she was put on trial for believing in the power and presence of the Holy Spirit, or for criticizing the Puritan power structure, or for daring to believe that women could understand Scripture. Later writers have seized on her case to make all sorts of points about all kinds of issues: feminism, authoritarianism, power, politics, and hypocrisy. God used Anne Hutchinson for his own purposes. She moved south and helped found the colony of Rhode Island, an early haven for other religious dissidents. A much bigger haven for dissenters was founded a little later by William Penn. Penn's father had been a prominent supporter of King Charles II during the difficult days of the English Commonwealth. In 1681, Charles II took land that had been under the control of his brother, the Duke of York, and granted it to Penn, insisting that it be named Penn's Woods, Pennsylvania. As governor, Penn wrote and brought with him the colony's first constitution, called the Frame of Government. From the beginning, Penn treated the Native Americans with utmost respect and fair dealings. He made his colonists buy their land from the Indians, although English law did not require them to do so. As a result, no other colony had a better relationship with their native neighbors. This was good because Penn's beliefs prohibited him from resorting to violence. William Penn was a member of the Religious Society of Friends, a Quaker. From the time of its founding in 1682, Pennsylvania had no armed militia for generations. The Quakers, like the Anabaptists we have studied in previous weeks, were strict pacifists. The Quakers took their personal approach to religion much farther than the Anabaptists ever did. They believed in following an inner light rather than church creeds and conventions. This seemed dangerously subjective to more orthodox Christians who warned that those who walk by the inner light will wind up in the outer darkness. Quakers were constantly in trouble for their religious convictions in England and in her colonies. Pennsylvania's history involves the neighboring territory of Delaware. King Charles gave land to William Penn that did not include any access to the sea. The land between Pennsylvania and the ocean was all held by the king's brother, James, the Duke of York. James leased the territory at the mouth of the Delaware River to Penn, who set up a representative government for the people there. The territory we now call Delaware was known as the Three Lower Counties because it was downriver from Pennsylvania. At first, Pennsylvania and Delaware had an equal number of representatives, but Pennsylvania kept growing. By 1701, the Delaware delegates refused to meet with the Pennsylvania legislature. They asked William Penn to give them their own legislature, which he did. The Delaware legislature began meeting in its own right in 1704, but had the same governor as Pennsylvania. The two colonies were not formally separated until the Revolutionary War. We can't end our tour of 17th century religious issues in America without touching on the Salem witchcraft trials. These were held in 1692 in Salem, Massachusetts, a few miles north of Boston. The witch hunt began when several village girls began behaving strangely. Their behavior was well documented at the time, but has never been completely explained. They may have been victims of mass hysteria, or food poisoning, or, as the Puritans believed, of demonic activity. Things got much more complicated when a black servant from the island of Barbados announced that she was, in fact, a witch. The next thing you knew, it seemed like everybody was accusing somebody of witchcraft. Before the hysteria was over, 19 church members, including one minister, had been convicted of being witches and were hung for it. Another man was crushed to death by stones for refusing to enter a plea of innocent or guilty to the charge of witchcraft. The witchcraft scare lasted about a year. The colony's leading ministers helped stop it, finally. In 1693, the people still in jail on witchcraft charges were freed. After it was all over, the people of Massachusetts were horrified at what they had done. In 1711, the colony's legislature made payments to the families of the witch hunt victims. We've looked at just 3 samples of religious life in the colonies, but they make it easy to see why America was moving towards a model of religious pluralism. America was big enough to include all sorts of people, even people who walked by their own inner light, like the Quakers. Religious freedom seemed to work, while efforts to regulate religion, like the trial of Anne Hutchinson, seemed a mistake in hindsight. And the tragic example of Salem was a sobering reminder of how dangerously wrong religious authorities could be. As religious freedom took root in America, political freedom was taking new forms in England. The Glorious Revolution established the principle that it was the people who chose their king, and not vice versa. France might believe in absolute monarchy, but England, and her colonies, most certainly did not. We'll see how that plays out in Unit 4.